He proposed to me, and I think I broke up with him right after. Sounds absurd? Maybe. But for some people, love isn't just about roses and diamond rings. It's about boundaries, buried pasts, and doors that should never be opened without permission. On the very day we celebrated our 2 year anniversary, what should have been the perfect proposal became the trigger for a nightmare I've kept hidden for a decade. The problem wasn't the ring, it was where he found it and the lies he chose to believe. I love him, but for the first time, I'm terrified of a future with him. Love always demands sacrifice, understanding, but above all, a deep respect for personal boundaries. There are doors in the soul of the one you love that you must learn to stand outside of. Not because you're unimportant, but because what lies beyond is a battlefield they're still fighting to survive. And if you step through without being invited, sometimes you destroy not just the relationship, but the person themselves. My boyfriend, or more accurately, my ex, never understood that. I used to think I could trust him. Over the 2 years we were together, starting from a no strings attached kind of thing, we gradually grew into something real, something serious. I never told him much about my parents, just that I was no longer in contact with them, and that seemed to be enough for him. Or so he said. He told me he'd wait. No pressure, no questions. I believed him, because to me that was the first true sign of someone who respects boundaries. But all that trust shattered in a single moment. It happened not long after my mother found my new Facebook and sent a message. It was short, just asking if I'd come home for Christmas. He saw it. I didn't hide it. I told him the truth. She was my mother, and I had no intention of replying. I made it clear I would explain everything when I was ready. He nodded. Okay, he said. You don't have to tell me until you're ready. But just days later, he went behind my back. He messaged my mother. He met with both my parents, the same people I had cut off at 16 for reasons so horrific, I can barely think of them without feeling sick. And he didn't just meet them. He sat down with them, he talked, he asked for their blessing to propose to me. Worse yet, he accepted my grandmother's ring from them. A ring that had always symbolized the only real love I ever received in that family. My grandmother had been my lifeline. Taking it from the very people who drove me away at 16, that wasn't a gesture of love. It was betrayal. Like smearing ashes over a sacred memory. What broke me wasn't just that he met them. It was the way he disregarded every boundary I'd carefully set. To him, tradition mattered more than anything. You ask the bride's parents, you use a family ring, you would give her a wedding with smiling relatives in the background. Those values can be beautiful, but when you place them above the feelings and limits of the person you love, they become dangerous weapons. He trusted his instincts when talking to my mother, said they seemed like decent people. He said if they had really hurt me, he would have felt it, but he didn't feel anything. So, in his mind, what I told him couldn't possibly be true. But how could he understand? The scars I carry aren't on my skin. They don't show up in a Facebook message. They live in the way I shake when someone says the word parents. In the panic attacks at 2 a.m. In the dark memories that nearly killed me. Memories I only survived because of the man I married back then. He never asked why I got married at 16. Never asked why I changed my last name. Never asked anything, because he said he could wait. But when the moment came, he crossed the only line I'd ever asked him not to. And when I broke down, do you know what he said? They told me you'd lie. I asked him for one thing. Just one thing. Let me tell my story when I'm ready. And that was the one thing he couldn't do. Love doesn't always fall apart because of physical betrayal. Sometimes it breaks because someone chooses to believe strangers over you. And sometimes emotional betrayal cuts deeper than 1,000 lies. I used to think he was my safe place, my second home. But in the end, he was like everyone else. not patient enough to understand that true safety in love doesn't come from tradition. It comes from trust and respect. I used to think that if he ever proposed, it would be a sacred moment. Maybe it had happened where we first made memories together, or while we were sitting side by side after a long day, something simple but warm. I didn't need fireworks. I didn't need a fancy restaurant. I didn't need a big show. All I wanted was a promise, one that came from the heart, from someone I believed understood me more than anyone else. Instead, I got a proposal wrapped in betrayal, tied up with the suffocating bow of traditional values, and ending in nothing but disgust. If you followed my story up to this point, you probably understand why I say that, but let me take you right into that exact moment so you can see how, in the span of one evening, every illusion I had about love and safety was shattered to pieces. It was our second anniversary. We were having dinner at home. He had cooked my favorite dish himself. Everything felt perfect, soft, peaceful. And then, just when I thought the night was winding down, he got down on one knee and pulled out a small red velvet box. I had never seen that box before. My heart tightened, a mix of surprise and emotion, until he opened it and I saw the ring inside. My grandmother's ring. An old-fashioned design, blue stone in the center, gold edges around it. I used to sneak it out of her jewelry box as a kid whenever she wasn't looking. She would laugh and say, "That one's yours someday." I believed her. Even though she passed away when I was still little, my love for her was one of the only things that remained untouched after everything in my family fell apart. But that ring, it couldn't be here. It was with my parents, along with every other piece of my past left behind when I ran away from home. Which is why the only thing I could manage to say was, "Where did you get this ring?" He smiled, proud of himself. Said he'd met my mother, that after seeing a message from her, he used her name to find a way to contact her, that they talked for a long time, and that my parents, whom I'd cut off for more than a decade, had given him the ring along with their blessing for our marriage. In that moment, I couldn't hear anything anymore. Time froze. The space around me blurred, like I was standing between two worlds, one where I was with the man I loved, and another filled with screaming nightmares and the kind of touch that sends ice down your spine. I shot up, trembling, too hurt and too furious to even speak clearly. I didn't cry. The pain didn't come in tears. It came like a blade, digging into memories I'd buried deep, now forced to resurface by someone who refused to believe me. I don't remember exactly what I said. I just remember asking him to leave. No goodbye, no clear ending, but inside me, everything had already collapsed. Later, once I'd calmed down, I realized the part that hurt the most wasn't that he met my parents. It was that he used the most sacred memory I had left, my grandmother's ring, as a tool to validate the traditional dream he wanted to create. That wasn't a proposal. It was a declaration that he chose to believe others over me, chose to impose his values on me, and chose to act on what he thought was right, without caring about my painful and complex lived experience. That ring used to symbolize unconditional love from the only family member I ever truly felt safe with. But in his hand, under the soft yellow light of our living room, it became a symbol of violation, of being overpowered, of pain. It wasn't a token of love anymore. It was evidence of betrayal. Some things can't be fixed with an apology. Some moments break more than years of building ever could. And from that point on, I knew, even if we got back together, that ring would always be there, like a stain I could never wash off from the future I once imagined. If that proposal was a knife plunged straight into my memory, then the conversation that followed was when that knife was twisted deeper, not by my parents, but by the very person I once thought would protect me for a lifetime. I once thought everything would end when he walked out of the house after the failed proposal evening. But no, the worst was yet to come. At that time, I was still hesitant, still hopeful that he was just an innocent man, deceived by the kind facade of my parents, that he never intended to hurt me. He just didn't know. I want to believe that. I need to believe that because if not, I will have to admit an even more painful truth that the person I love never truly believed in me. After a night of contemplation, I decided to speak my mind. No more hints, no more hiding. I have kept this pain in my heart for too long, and if I want to put an end to it, I need to clearly explain why I cannot continue. I'm not going alone. I invited my ex-husband, the one who married me when I was 16 to help me escape the hell of my family, to sit with me. He is a living witness, the only one who has seen everything unfold and is still by my side today. He knows what I need. Not another man to lean on, but a pillar of mental support, a clear gaze amidst the chaos. My boyfriend, now my ex, came over looking confused. He immediately asked, "Why is he here?" I simply replied, "I need him here when I tell you the whole truth." And then I started. No beating around the bush, no trying to downplay it, no using metaphors. I said directly, "My father used to abuse me, and my mother knew, but did nothing to stop it." I let that sentence echo in the air. That space should have been silent. He should have been stunned, shocked, or at least silent in astonishment. But he just said, "They told me you would lie." In that moment, I felt everything shatter. Not because he said it, but because of the way he said it. Calmly, almost sarcastically, as if I were a child trying to make up a story to escape blame. I don't need any more words. I know I've lost. I once thought that if one day I spoke out, the listener would embrace me and say they regretted that I had to endure such things. I don't need pity, just trust. But you chose to believe those who harmed me instead of believing the one trembling before you. The story you heard from my parents is clearly a cheap script, that I am mentally unstable, refused to see a doctor, and ran away from home just because I was caught breaking the law and threatened with punishment. A scenario that anyone who knows me would find absurd, but he believed. Not only did he believe Frauenliederzeit, but he also thought that staying with me after hearing that truth was an act of nobility, as if he were harboring someone with issues. I feel disgusted, not with my parents. I had long since gotten over the disgust towards them, but with him, the one I once loved, the one I thought would be with me for life, now looks at me with judgment and pity. My ex-husband couldn't keep his composure. He stood up, speaking clearly and firmly. "You have 30 minutes to pack your things and get out of here. If you say one more word to her, those 30 minutes will become 0. And he left, without saying a word of apology, not trying to explain, not asking if I'm okay, just silently packing up belongings like a thief caught red-handed. That was when I knew love could no longer be salvaged. Because a relationship cannot exist if one of the two cannot be trusted, and worse, is seen as a liar about their own pain. I believed in you with all the trust left after a childhood crushed. I opened my heart, hoped, and tried to believe that true happiness was possible, that the past no longer held power over the present. But in the end, he reminded me, not everyone deserves your complete trust, even if they say they love you. When people talk about an ex-lover or an ex-husband, it's often with a tone of caution or sometimes even trauma. But for me, my ex-husband isn't a shameful past, nor a wound I need to erase. He's a part of my survival story, a witness to everything I've endured, and the only person right now who truly understands why I'm falling apart. While the man I love chose to believe the one who hurt me, the man I once loved stood up for me without needing a single explanation. I met him when I was just 16, a scared, exhausted, and desperate girl. My family wasn't a place of comfort. It was a trap that suffocated me more each day. When every door seemed closed, he, my only real friend, reached out his hand and said, "Marry me. If we have a marriage certificate, they can't drag you back home anymore." He didn't promise eternal love. He didn't talk about forever. There were no sweet words. He just wanted me to live, truly live. And I did because of that marriage. A marriage with no sex, no binding expectations, but filled with kindness and sacrifice. We got divorced when I was 21, when I had found some stability and no longer needed that legal shield. But our connection didn't end, it simply transformed. From a bond that saved me to a kind of kinship that defied any label. When I started falling for a new boyfriend, my ex husband never interfered. In fact, he was the one who played matchmaker. Once he saw me smiling more and opening up again, he wanted me to be happy, truly happy, even if he knew he couldn't give me that kind of love. But on the day I had to tell my boyfriend the full truth, the first person I called was my ex husband. Not because I was weak, but because I needed someone who knew everything, saw everything, and believed me completely, to remind me that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't making it up, and I didn't deserve to be doubted just because my past is too terrifying to say out loud. When my boyfriend arrived and saw my ex husband sitting in the living room, he was clearly uncomfortable. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was discomfort, but he sat down anyway, listened as I began to speak, and then shattered everything with a single sentence that left me breathless. "They told me you were going to lie." In that moment, it felt like being stabbed a second time, and my ex husband, without a second of hesitation, stood up. His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, cold, and final. "You have 30 minutes to pack your things and leave. If you say one more word to her, those 30 minutes become zero." I had never seen him like that. He had always been calm, soft spoken, even quiet enough that people barely noticed him. But this time he stood like a shield in front of me, ready to face the man I once thought I'd marry. My boyfriend didn't argue. He knew he had crossed a line. And he also knew, in front of my ex husband, he had no ground to stand on after choosing to believe someone else over the woman he claimed to love. After he left, I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I just sat there, numb. My emotions felt like a blank void. But my ex husband came over, sat quietly beside me, placed a hand gently on my shoulder, and said, "You're not crazy. You're not wrong. You're not alone." And that sentence, though simple, pulled me back from the edge. Because in our darkest moments, what people need isn't always a solution, it's someone who won't leave. Since that day, he's temporarily moved in with me. Not because I'm too fragile to be alone, but because we both know my parents now have access to my personal information. They know I live alone, and no one knows what might happen if they decide to come find me. He's not here as an ex-husband, but as the only person still standing with me, without hesitation, without question. Love takes many forms. The love I had for my boyfriend, romantic and sweet, collapsed in a single day because he wasn't strong enough to stand beside me when the winds turned. But the love I hold for my ex-husband, though no longer romantic, is a steady, honest, unconditional thread that has pulled me back from collapse time and time again. After he walked out of the house that day, escorted by the cold gaze of my ex-husband, I thought I would completely fall apart. But strangely enough, I didn't cry. I didn't feel that familiar emptiness that used to creep in after every past disappointment. The clearest thing I felt at that moment was relief. Not because I didn't love him. I did. So much that I once believed I could bury my past just to fully live with this man. But when love no longer walks hand in hand with trust, when your heart no longer feels safe to be entrusted, no amount of love can salvage something that's been rotting from within. I knew deep down that the breakup wasn't a sudden impulse. It was the result of a long string of disappointments I kept suppressing, of warning signs I chose to ignore simply because I wanted to believe he was different. When he chose to believe my parents over me, he didn't just hurt me, he dismissed everything I had bravely overcome. He unintentionally sided with the very people who had buried my childhood in fear, and in doing so, he labeled the story I was about to tell as a lie. The biggest shock wasn't the proposal, it wasn't the ring. It was the realization that the man I loved thought he was being noble for staying with a girl who had a questionable past. He believed his presence was something I should be grateful for, that I was lucky he didn't leave from the beginning. But I don't need pity. I need a real partner, someone who listens and trusts without demanding proof or explanations. I used to believe that if he just heard the truth, he would understand. But no, he had the chance to know, and he chose to ignore it long before. He reached out to my parents behind my back, handed them my personal information, and believed that feelings and tradition were better reasons than the fear and trauma I'd never dared speak aloud. And so I chose to let go. Not because I was weak, but because I finally loved myself more. And I knew if I don't protect myself, no one else will. As for my ex husband, like I said, he moved in with me for a short while, not to replace the man I'd lost, but to help me face the possibility that my parents might show up. Because now they had my real name, where I worked, and possibly even my address. I started contacting attorneys, asking about the possibility of getting a restraining order. Of course, I didn't have proof they'd try to harm me, but my history might be enough to file a reasonable claim of potential danger. I also spoke with my landlord about moving or upgrading the security of my current place. I changed my phone number, updated every single privacy setting on my social media, and erased every trace of the old me. Once again, I returned to that anonymous state I had maintained for so many years. Not because I wanted to live in the shadows, but because sometimes hiding is the only way to survive. At the same time, I began seriously considering returning to therapy. I had stopped a few years ago, thinking I was finally okay. But clearly, nothing is ever truly okay if a single touch on an old memory can shatter everything again. I need to learn how to live on, not by forgetting, but by coexisting with the truth, by living with the pain without letting it control me anymore. I don't regret loving him. I don't regret the 2 years we spent together, the memories, the warm hugs, the nights watching old movies, or the mornings we made coffee for each other. That love was real, but it's also that very love that helped me realize love is not blind acceptance of everything, especially not the disrespect of your boundaries and trust. Now, even though my heart still carries the ache, I know this: choosing myself is never the wrong choice. And if anyone ever asks, do you regret leaving someone just because of a proposal? I'll say, I didn't leave him because of the proposal. I walked away because after that proposal, I saw it more clearly than ever. He wasn't standing with me. He was standing with the very people who once destroyed me.